and then just kind of smear it around. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to do a little work on this Lincoln Mark VII. Now the Mark VII is sort of known as the Mustang in a tuxedo, the brute in a suit, I've heard guys call it. It is Lincoln's version of the Fox body Mustang, and it is technically a Fox platform car. But don't get confused. If you think, oh, it's the same thing as a Mustang, I can work on a Lincoln exactly the same as a Mustang, you are sorely mistaken. These cars have tons and tons of differences between them and the Fox body. A lot of that stems from the fact that they were much better equipped. It's got 4-channel ABS brakes. It's got a whole pile more electronics, auto headlamps, auto high beams, auto chromatic mirror, heated outside mirrors, inside like compass and outside temperature display, power driver and passenger seats, 8-way seats, automatic climate controls, a trip minder, whatever good that is, all kinds of stuff like this. Power antenna, power trunk pull down, etc., etc. But a key difference, functional difference, is that these cars have an air suspension. So instead of traditional coil springs, they use air springs, or you might refer to them as airbags. It is one of the weak points on the Lincoln Mark VII, the air suspension. As it is with, I would say, every car that has air suspension, over time the air springs start to get hard, they can generate leaks, especially at the folds, and it's not uncommon to see these cars down on their knees. And when they get down on their knees, you get an interference between the wheels and the fenders. You can't drive them, you can't do anything. You've got to tow them. Also, when you go to put them on a hoist, there are special service requirements in order to do that. You can't just lift them up, or you can run into trouble. So what kind of trouble would you run into? Well, for example, you lift the car up on a hoist, you have the air suspension active, and it remains active even with the key off for like an hour or something after the key has been shut off. So don't think you can just drive it in, turn the key off, and the air suspension is disabled. It isn't. If you lift it up, what happens is the suspension extends, the ride height sensors detect an over height condition on the car, and they begin to release air from the bags, and they will let up to all of the air out of the bags. So then when you set the car back down, now there's no air in the air springs, and you can damage those springs if you set the car on a spring which is not inflated. So this is a big problem, and if you have one of these cars and you don't do the service work yourself, you need to make sure that the guys who are doing the service work understand that they have to disconnect the air suspension system before they raise it on like a 2-post lift like this, anything that would cause the suspension to dangle. Now, there's 2 ways to disable the air suspension system. 1, just disconnect the battery. If you disconnect the battery, it's off. 2, and the most common way is there is a switch in the trunk. So like you take it to a tire shop to get new tires put on it, probably a good idea if you disable the switch before you can put it in there. Don't take a chance that the tire shop guy is going to know. The air suspension system on these cars is one of the most problematic parts of them. And over time, the availability of air springs has declined to the stage where now you can no longer get the Arnott springs. I guess you can get Dorman springs for the front. You can get springs off a used one, takeout springs, and I have some here, but you kind of wonder if the state of the takeout springs is just as bad as the ones that are on the car. And I can tell you a couple of things about this car. If I leave this car for a couple weeks, it'll be down on its knees in the front here. Definitely the driver's side front airbag is leaking. I'm pretty sure it's a fold leak, could be some other leak, might be around the solenoid, maybe. But these are original air springs in it. It's totally reasonable to think they're just used up. The other thing that happened, if I load the trunk up with a bunch of heavy stuff, like we're going away for a weekend or whatever, I got it out on a little bit of a rough highway. suddenly I would have the air suspension light on. And I'm pretty sure that what happened with that was that the shocks and or the air springs in the back are getting soft. And consequently, you're bouncing on these roads and it's causing a ride height change, which the air suspension system, the little computer microcontroller that runs it, interprets as a suspension failure. So it turns the light on. We did some bounce tests on the car. It feels kind of soft back there. So what I'm going to do here today is go through and replace all the air springs, and I'm going to replace the rear shocks because I think they're a little on the soft side. And then we'll see if that makes the car ride a little better and keep that suspension light off. Okay, I've got the trunk unloaded and paneling pulled back so we could get at the shocks. Let me give you a quick tour of the trunk here. On the driver's side here, that's the airbag disable switch. This little wire here is the grounding pigtail for the air suspension system. And the air suspension module plugs in here and is tucked in the inner fender there. So if you're going to do diagnostics, you need to ground this little module, and that's grounded as easily as doing this. That's it. That's all you have to do to ground the airbag module in order to use the diagnostics mode. Also, right here is the inertia switch, the fuel shut off. We're supposed to shut the fuel off in the event of a wreck. And there is the top of the shock absorber. So you saw inside the top of the shock. The bottom of the shock is here. We're gonna unbolt it at the top. Then we can unbolt this and pull this out. Then the air springs are up here. I don't know what the best way to get a look at them is. That's the air spring there. Up there, that's the solenoid. There's two parts to it. There's an electrical connector and there is an air line, which is kind of on the other side there. So that has to be pulled out to release the air in the air spring in order to get it out. Then around here, same thing on the other side, but around here, up in there, this is a ride height sensor. It's a good idea to disconnect one end of the ride height sensor so you don't get a sudden drop on the rear end housing that might damage that sensor, because that's a hard part to replace too. Okay, obviously we're going to take the wheels off for this. Up around the front, it's the same general idea. There's a ride height sensor. On the back there's just one height sensor, on the front there's one on each side. And then this is the air spring. And then something you should probably be aware of around here, this is a ABS sensor. Make sure you don't break that when you're working on this, because you'll be sorry if you do. And you can see these little clips here. This is what retains the lower portion of the front spring down to the control arm. So you're gonna have to pull those clips off when the time comes. Okay, here's a better view of the air solenoid. There's a clip here that's got to be popped out so you can turn the solenoid in order to release the air pressure. There's an electrical connector which you need to pop off, making sure not to tug the wires. And there's an air line, okay? I think this is where you start to see some of the problems that you run into with cars like this, because it's been undercoated. So this air line here is all covered in undercoat, which probably makes the quick disconnect here harder to work, and maybe impacts the airline seal when you go to put it back together. So now we got the wheels off, we can go ahead and start disassembling the suspension. If we were just going to do the shocks, what the book says to do is support the car on jack stands, undo the shock nut at the top retainer nut for the shock, then make sure that you have some of the weight on the jack stands, then undo the bottom nut, bottom bolt, and then take the shock out. The reason they suggest to do it that way is so that you don't suddenly have the suspension swing out of control because you've got the air spring pressured up. But here we're going to do the springs, air springs, and the shocks. So what we're going to do first is relieve the pressure in the air springs. Then we can go ahead and start taking the shock out without having to support the housing. The first thing I'm going to do is disconnect the ride height sensor. So there's a little lever, and then we can just pry it off of this little ball. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is try and clean up a little bit of this undercoat on here gently. Flick it out there with that knife, and I'm going to spray a little brake clean over there. Before we open everything up, you can start to see the color come up on there because that push lock is red. And that line is actually green. See that? Guys wonder why professional shops don't want to take on cars like this, because they're full of problems like this that you have to deal with before you even say hello. There we go. Got that off without breaking the tabs. That's good. I'll push that in, push that down, and pull back in order to release the air line from it. Then we're going to pop this spring clip off of here. There we go. Starting to come. There we go. We got that out. To release the air pressure, the whole solenoid turns. It should turn counterclockwise. We're going to get on here with some slip jaw pliers. This is a plastic body, so you got to be very cautious with this stunt. And I'm sorry if you guys can't see. It's important that I see whether I'm turning it or not. So we're going to get on the housing. There we go. It did turn a little. You see that? Turn it until it's off that lock. Then we'll pull it out. I'll put my safety glasses on here. And this should, if we pull this out, that'll release the air. Now you can probably see that air spring is got the air released. Okay. And you turn it again and you can pull the solenoid right out. So there should be no more spring tension on the rear end here on this side, which will make it easy for us to pull this shock out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around to the other side and release the air out of the air spring on that side. Then we'll bring the car down. We'll back this upper nut off, or take the upper nut off of this shock, and then we can take the shock out the bottom. Then we'll go ahead and try and get the air spring out. Okay, there's our driver's side upper shock nut. I've got both of the airbags relieved right now, and we're going to get this off. Up at the top there's a flat, and you can put a small wrench on there to hold it. We're going to break it loose with a regular combo wrench. Then I'm going to put a ratcheting box end on there. Let's see if it would break loose just of its own volition. You can see it's turning the whole thing. So I'm going to have to get in there with the flat. Wow. Okay, so if your little teeny wrench doesn't work, try vice grips. Honest to God, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this or not. Reaching in here and around a camera and all that isn't the easiest, but I gotta hold that with vice grips. Okay, so that seems like that's broken loose. I know vice grips have a reputation for being kind of a backyard tool. But there's places where they can save the day. Okay, so that shock is taken off at the top. Let's try this bolt at the bottom here. Remember, the bolt goes in from the inside towards the outside. And I did put jack stands in here, but they shouldn't really be necessary. Okay, and there's our shock out. So we can toss that and we'll get the new one. But let's take the air spring out first. Okay, so the air spring is held in place at the top with a locking collar and at the bottom with these two bolts here. So let's see if we can get those off. If you can, try to keep yourself out from underneath the car. Although I do have jack stands under it here, so it's not going to collapse. It's on the hoist and jack stands. Okay, so we know that's free on the back side. And we'll give that a tap. And it's not because of pressure on there, it's just because of the fastener. I'm going to give it a little punch and finish tapping that out. There we go. All right, so then the last thing to release this is this collar. Rotates clockwise. And I actually have already broke it loose, but there's actually a little spring clip in here which locks in place. It'll lock into the housing. You gotta release that and then rotate that clockwise, and it should release it from the housing, and we should be able to pull the air spring out. Let's see. There we go. Okay, if you're going to do this, you need to at least replace the outer O-rings on the solenoid and install a new O-ring in the solenoid housing on the new spring. So this Arnott package came with O-rings. That's nice. I ordered O-rings as well, so I got extra. But let's get a look at these. So there's actually 4 O-rings here. The big one is for the spring housing, or the solenoid housing in the spring. The 2 little ones are for the end of the solenoid, and the littlest one actually goes inside the air fitting. Now, in order to do that, you got to have a spare piece of air line. You got to jam it in there, and you got to pull the lock out. Then you can put that little O-ring in there. I think we're going to take a chance that that seal is okay, and we're going to be able to reuse it and just replace the outer O-rings here. You're going to want to have some dielectric grease. This is Permatex dielectric tune-up grease, and it's good to have a pick. There's one. They don't feel bad. And I don't think it was leaking back here. We'll kind of roll these on. Like that. You're supposed to use dielectric grease on this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this dielectric grease around this big O-ring before I install it. Yeah, and then make sure you drop it so that you get stuff all over it. And let's just try to grease that up as much as possible. Then we're going to squeeze it in there. Well, you can see that's down in that housing. It's sitting in there just the way it should be. Then we'll take and put a little of this dielectric grease on O-rings on the end of the solenoid, and then just kind of smear it around like that. This is the surface that you're going to be sitting on right here, so it doesn't hurt to just put a little grease around there and just kind of give it a smear just to try and help that seal. So that solenoid's prepared, that spring is prepared, and we're going to put this in, put it in like this. So we go to the first lock, turn it, push it in. It should sit down tight, then we turn it and it should lock. And it turns nice and smooth because everything's nice and greasy sealed. And when you're done, you should have that pointing straight back with the electrical connector at the downside of the spring. That spring should be ready to put back in. Okay, let me draw your attention to a couple of things on the installation. For starters, don't forget your clip on your solenoid once you have it installed. Then, when you have a look at this, on the lock ring, there are a couple of alignment marks. This is a notch. This is a flat. So when you go to install it on the passenger side, you line the flat up with the center line of the solenoid. That's how it goes in. When you go to do it on the driver's side, you line the notch up with the center line of the solenoid. That's how it goes in. Then, once it's in place, you're going to turn the lock ring clockwise, like that, and it will lock in place. And you'll see this little clip will actually lock over, and this little piece here will slide over a little lip in there. So that's how it's done, and that's how you align it when you go to put it back in. There's little tabs in here that this lock ring goes onto, and if you align it like I'm talking about, it should go in place. So get your bottom of the spring kind of in place with the control arm there. Line up the notch to the center, slide that in, and then rotate it clockwise. There. You can even hear it click. You can double check here over the lip there. Everything looks good. And the spring is sort of semi-lined up with the control arm, with the center of the control arm. Then we're going to go ahead and put in the shock absorber. I guess at this point there's nothing to prevent you from installing the air line. You just press that in and then kind of lift up on the push lock. That should be locked. Then we'll click the wiring on there. That's all hooked up. And we're going to go ahead and put the shock absorber in. Okay, so we got our new aftermarket shock here. We've cut the strapping off of it, allowed it to extend. We want to pump it about 5 times to charge it. There's one. Two. Okay, so this shock is not exactly the same as the factory shock. It uses Imperial hardware and so on. Let's dump out the hardware that came with it. Get a couple bushings here. We're going to slide one of these bushing cups over the end of the shock. Bushing on there. Then we're going to slide it up into the car, and inside we're going to put the other bushing on, followed by the other bushing cup, followed by a nut, and these ones came with a jam nut, so we can put those on. So those go inside the car. Now, we kind of got the suspension hung pretty low here, so what we're going to do is slide this up in there, and then I'm going to actually secure it to the shock mount point on the housing. Then we're going to use a jack and just kind of lift it up into place. Okay, let's give that a try. So slide that up in there. That's roughly in place. We'll grab our bolt. We don't want to tighten this bolt yet. We're just using it to hold it, but I'm just going to start the nut. So then we're going to go ahead and jack up the housing a little bit just to push this up into place so we can install it on the inside. I'm just going to use this floor jack on, well, in this case I'm actually going to use it on the bottom of the rotor. There's the installation in the trunk. You can see I got a jam nut on there. So that's all done. Now one of the final steps is to try and get the air springs bolted back into the car. So what we're going to do here is use a jack under the differential, and we're going to jack it up a little bit at a time until we can get those bolts in. You just got to take it easy with this because you don't want to bind anything. There, you can see that it's getting very close there. I bet it's lined up on the other side. Okay, there's the first bolt through. So, let's try this. All right. I want to finish up the other side the same way. Then we can try and fill this airbag. Okay, so now there's a new shock and a new airbag. And as you can see, the bolts are in, but that airbag has no air in it. We cannot put the car on the ground like this. So we need to get a pre-fill on the airbag. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, like everything with the air suspension system on this car, doing a specialty thing like pre-filling the airbag in the back is like a video game cheat code. So we got to do a series of things here. We're going to start with the air suspension switch in the on position and the key off. Then we're going to open the driver's door, turn the key to run for 5 seconds, then shut it off. Then we're going to run around back and ground the diagnostic pigtail on the air suspension system. Once we've grounded the diagnostic pigtail, we're going to apply the brakes, turn the key to the run position, and that should put the system in the airbag fill, pre-fill mode. Then if we open and close the door once, that should begin filling the rear airbags. Put a charger on to make this go a little easier on your battery. Okay, air suspension to on. Open driver's door. This stick, by the way, is for pressing the brakes. Key to run for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Key to off. Diagnostic pigtail short. Press and hold the brake. Then key to run. There you can see we've got it in air suspension diagnostic mode. Let's close the door and open it, and we'll see if it starts to fill that spring. Look at that. So it should run the pump for 60 seconds to fill these rear springs. All right, that's the 60-second pre-fill cycle. You can see that spring looks filled. I don't see any folds in it. Everything looks good. So we can put the wheels on and put that back on the ground. Now, what we want to do is shut the air suspension system off. We can unground the pigtail, and we'll check that we didn't, say, lose all our air out of here. No, we didn't. Start by releasing the ride height sensor just to try and get that out of the way. You can just pop the little lever and pry it off the ball. Then that's out of the way and won't get damaged. Then we'll give this a quick squirt just to try and clean that up a little. Take the wiring harness off like that. Give this a quick wipe. Then press down on the push lock and pull the line out, air line out. Pop the clip. Gently turn the solenoid. Then lift it. Air it out. Pull the solenoid out. Get underneath and pop the clip. Just kind of pops off. Press down on the lock and rotate the lock ring. There we go. Press the bag down, and if you're just a little bit lucky, you can pull it out. That feels like something's loose inside there, doesn't it? That's probably not good. Okay, so we redid the O-rings on the solenoids. Don't forget your clip. And on these ones, it goes around from the back like that. Okay, so now it's a little bit of a trick to get this in. And what you want to do is, because this is the driver's side, we're going to line the notch up with the center line of the solenoid. And then we've got to get this lock ring up in these little tabs here and lock it in place. That's a little tricky, and chances are we're going to have to compress the bag just a little bit in order to get it in place there. So let's start trying to fish it in. There we go. Press the bag a little. So that's in the general area. Now we need to try and get this in the tabs, which if you oriented it right in the first place should go. Now it's got to be flat on here, so you guys got to reach around and make sure that you've really got those tabs in the right spot. Somehow we got to get our clip on under here, and what we're probably going to end up doing is jacking on this a little bit in order to get that in position. But let's go ahead and put our air line in place. Slide that in. I always like to just give a little pull up on the push lock, make sure it's locked. Slide that on. What we're going to do is we're going to bring the car down a little bit so we can get a jack under here, and we're going to jack just a little bit here in order to get this through the control arm so we can clip it. The final step here is to get this clip over the bottom of the air spring there through this hole and get it clipped to the control arm. So we're using a jack, and you do want to be careful not to lift the car off the 2-post and drop it on yourself though. Let's just jack that up until we got that thing through there. Okay, the last thing here is to try and fill these springs up. So we're going to initiate the fill sequence the same as for the back, except for this time, instead of just opening and closing the door once, which initiates the rear fill, we're going to open and close it twice, which should initiate the front fill. Door twice. Once, twice. It's a satisfying feeling to finally have the car back on the ground with all new bags, new rear shocks. That pre-fill procedure fills up the bags enough so you don't damage them when you set it down, but it doesn't actually make a suspension adjustment. As you can see here, this car is kind of down on its knees. So the final step is to key the car on or even start it and let the air suspension make its own adjustments. So let's see if it straightens itself out. We'll make sure we have the system turned on. System to on, not in diagnostic. Sounds like it's doing it. That's our final adjustment. Now we're okay to drive the car. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell so that you won't miss out on future videos.